Perched on a rocky spur in the hills above the French Riviera, Saint-Paul-de-Vence is one of the best preserved fortified towns in Provence, and its shape today owes almost everything to a single, deliberate act of state planning. A 16th century royal border fortress built to defend the Kingdom of France. The site itself was inhabited long before that. Its elevated position, overlooking the surrounding valleys and the coastal plain toward the Mediterranean, made it a natural place of settlement since antiquity, with traces suggesting occupation in Ligurian and later Gallo-Roman times. By the early Middle Ages, a small hilltop village had formed around a church dedicated to Saint Paul, from which the town takes its name. For centuries it remained a modest hill village, unremarkable except for its defensible position. That position became strategically critical in the early 16th century. Following a series of territorial shifts in the Italian wars, the border between the Kingdom of France and the County of Nice, then under the House of Savoy, settled just a few kilometers to the east of the village, along the Var River. Saint-Paul-de-Vence suddenly sat on the front line of the French frontier, facing Savoyard, and by extension, Habsburg territory. It was this new frontline status that led King Francis I to order the town rebuilt as a proper fortress. Between roughly 1537 and 1547, the medieval village was enclosed in a new circuit of ramparts, replacing older, thinner walls with fortifications designed for the age of artillery. This is the key to understanding why the town looks the way it does. It was not built as a picturesque village, but as a working piece of military engineering, and its charm today is largely a byproduct of that original defensive logic. Architecturally, the ramparts belong to the transitional period of European military design, often called Tres Italienne, or the Italian-style bastioned fortification. Rather than tall, thin medieval towers vulnerable to cannon fire, the walls were built low, thick and angled with projecting bastions that allowed defenders to cover every approach with flanking fire and eliminate blind spots. This style had emerged in Italy earlier in the century in response to the increasing power of siege artillery, and its adoption at Saint-Paul-de-Vence reflects how quickly French Royal Engineers absorbed Italian military innovation along a border that faced Italian and Savoyard forces directly. The identity of the specific engineer or architect who oversaw construction is not reliably documented in accessible records, and the project is generally attributed to Francis I's Royal Engineering Corps rather than to a single-name designer, a reminder that fortification building in this era was typically a collective state-directed undertaking rather than the work of one credited architect. Inside the walls, the town's character comes from a very different, older tradition, vernacular Provençal domestic architecture. Narrow, winding streets, tall stone houses built shoulder to shoulder, small windows and red-tiled roofs are all features suited to the local climate and to defense. Narrow lanes offered shade in summer and made the town easier to secure, while shared walls conserved building stone and heat. Many of the houses standing today date from the 16th and 17th centuries, though they have been renovated repeatedly since. The result is a town where a single military-era plan, the walls, the gates, the street grid squeezed inside them, still governs the layout, even though the buildings within it have evolved over 4 centuries. The fortress never saw major combat, and by the 19th century its military purpose had faded along with the shifting of French borders further east. What remained was an intact, extraordinarily well-preserved example of Renaissance fortification, wrapped around a dense Provençal hill village, a combination that later proved irresistible to painters and eventually to tourists. In the 20th century, this same architecture, largely unchanged since the 1500s, is what drew Matisse, Chagall, Picasso, and other artists to Saint-Paul-de-Vence, light falling on centuries-old stone, streets built for people rather than cars, and a skyline still defined by ramparts rather than modern development. Many of them gathered at La Colombe d'Or, an inn built partly into the old fortifications, and their presence later helped inspire the nearby Fondation Mate, a modern art museum whose 1964 building was designed to sit in dialogue with the same Provençal hillside landscape that shaped the town centuries earlier. The village's enduring appeal, in other words, is not incidental to its history. It is a direct architectural inheritance from a 16th century royal decision to turn a small hilltop village into a fortified stronghold on the edge of France. What began as a practical response to artillery warfare and a shifting border became, 4 centuries later, one of the most visited walled towns in Europe, its ramparts now framing views rather than defending them.